The jazz music was playing softly in the background of the upscale restaurant when Marcus saw his wife Elena approaching their table with that familiar smile. The one she'd been wearing for months now. The one that never quite reached her eyes anymore. It was his 35th birthday, and she'd insisted on celebrating at Le Bernardin, their special place where he'd proposed 3 years ago. Marcus remembered that night vividly. He'd been nervous, sweating through his Tom Ford suit, the ring box burning a hole in his pocket. Elena had worn a midnight blue dress that made her look like she'd stepped out of a painting. When he'd gotten down on one knee, she'd cried. Real tears. Not the performative ones he'd grown accustomed to lately. "Happy birthday, darling," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. The candlelight flickered across her face as she placed a manila envelope next to his untouched champagne glass. "I have something for you." Marcus looked at the envelope, then at her perfectly manicured hands. The same hands that used to trace patterns on his chest when they'd lie in bed on Sunday mornings, talking about their future. Now those hands seemed foreign, calculating. He'd been an investment banker for 12 years, built his portfolio from nothing, learned to read people's intentions in their micro-expressions. Elena's smile was trembling at the corners. "What's this?" he asked, though he already knew. He'd known for weeks. "Open it," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the saxophone solo drifting from the speakers. Inside were separation papers. Not divorce. Separation. How thoughtful of her to ease him into it gradually. Marcus read through the first page, his expression unchanged, while Elena fidgeted with her wedding ring. The platinum band with the emerald-cut diamond he'd saved for months to buy. "I've been thinking about this for months," she began, her rehearsed speech tumbling out. "We've grown apart, Marcus. You're always working, always traveling. I need someone who can be present, who can give me the attention I deserve. I've already found an apartment in Soho. I'll be moving out this weekend." Marcus remembered the early days of their marriage when she'd understood his ambition, when she'd massage his shoulders after 18-hour days and tell him she was proud of him. When had that changed? When had his success become a burden instead of a shared victory? Marcus set the papers down and took a sip of champagne. Dom Perignon. 2012, their wedding champagne. The irony wasn't lost on him. "I see. And I suppose this someone who can give you proper attention has a name." Elena's face flushed. "I don't know what you're implying." "David Sullivan," Marcus said quietly. "Your yoga instructor. The one with the man bun and the Tesla. The one who's been teaching you those special private sessions every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 4 months. The color drained from Elena's face. "How did you—" "I'm in finance, Elena. I notice patterns. Like how our joint account showed charges for a couple's retreat in the Hamptons last month. The same weekend you told me you were at your sister's place in Boston. Or how your phone bill showed hundreds of texts to a number registered to David Sullivan Wellness, LLC. Marcus had actually discovered the affair by accident. He'd been reviewing their credit card statements for tax purposes when he noticed the unusual charges. The Hamptons retreat had been the smoking gun. $3,200 for a spiritual awakening weekend for 2. He'd called Elena that Saturday, supposedly to check in, and she'd answered breathlessly, claiming she was helping her sister move. But he could hear ocean waves in the background, and her sister lived in downtown Boston. "Marcus, I can explain—" "Can you? Can you explain the joint gym membership you signed up for last month? The one at David's studio that costs more than most people's rent? Or the lingerie charges from La Perla? Lingerie I've never seen you wear?" Elena's composure was cracking. "You've been spying on me?" "I've been protecting our assets. There's a difference." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. "But since we're exchanging gifts, I have something for you too." Elena's eyes widened. For a moment, hope flickered across her face. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. Maybe he was about to propose a second time. Maybe... She opened the box. Inside wasn't a ring. It was a flash drive. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Security footage from the lobby of the Mandarin Oriental. Timestamps from your Tuesday yoga sessions. Credit card receipts from lingerie stores I've never seen you shop at. Text messages recovered from your old phone, the one you thought you'd factory reset. Bank transfers you made to David's business account. Screenshots of your shared Instagram stories from places you told me you'd never been." Marcus had spent weeks gathering evidence, not out of obsession, but out of necessity. He'd learned long ago that, in finance, as in marriage, you protect yourself with documentation. The private investigator he'd hired, a former FBI agent named Catherine Torres, had been thorough. Too thorough, perhaps. The photos of Elena and David at the Hamptons retreat had been particularly hard to look at. "There's more," Marcus continued, his voice steady. "Hotel receipts from the Plaza, the St. Regis, the Greenwich Hotel. Always the same pattern. Tuesday afternoons, check out Wednesday morning. Always paid for with our joint account. You've been funding your affair with my money, Elena." Elena's hands started shaking. "Marcus, please." "I'm not finished." His voice remained calm, controlled. "The apartment in Soho you mentioned. I bought the building 6 months ago. It's part of my investment portfolio now. The lease you signed? It's invalid. The deposit you put down? That was technically paid with funds from our joint account, which makes it community property." The acquisition of the Soho building had been strategic. Marcus had noticed the address on Elena's phone. She'd been looking at apartments online for weeks, always returning to the same listing. When he'd discovered it was an investment opportunity, he'd moved quickly. The building was profitable, and owning it gave him leverage he hadn't expected to need. "You see, Elena, when you're married to someone who manages other people's money for a living, you learn to protect assets. The prenup you signed? It has a morality clause. Adultery voids your claim to any marital assets acquired during our marriage. The house in Westchester? The vacation home in Martha's Vineyard? The art collection? All mine." Elena was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. "You can't do this. I have rights." "You do have rights. You have the right to find a new place to live, since the Soho apartment is no longer available. You have the right to find a new job, since my recommendation letter to your consulting firm might be less than glowing, especially when they learn about your creative expense reporting. You have the right to find a new yoga instructor, since David's business license is about to come under scrutiny for tax evasion." Marcus had discovered David's tax issues almost by accident. The man had been claiming personal expenses as business deductions, including the hotel stays with Elena. The IRS would be very interested in his creative accounting. "Wait," Elena said, desperation creeping into her voice. "My job? What about my job?" "McKinsey values integrity above all else, Elena. They tend to frown upon consultants who embezzle company funds for personal use. That business trip to Seattle last month? The one where you extended your stay for the weekend? The hotel upgrade? The spa treatments? The couple's massage? All charged to your corporate card. All documented." Marcus had been meticulous in his research. Elena's expense reports had been sloppy, overconfident. She'd assumed he'd never look, never check. But Marcus checked everything. Marcus stood up, straightening his tie. "I've already moved your belongings to your mother's house in Queens. She's expecting you tonight. The locks have been changed, so don't bother trying to go home." "Marcus, wait." Elena stood up, reaching for him. "Oh, and Elena?" Marcus turned back to her one last time. "Happy birthday to me." He walked out of the restaurant into the cool October evening, leaving Elena sobbing at their table. The valet brought his car around, not the BMW they'd bought together, but the vintage Porsche he'd purchased in his name only last year. As he drove through the city streets, Marcus didn't feel angry or sad. He felt something he hadn't experienced in months: relief. The drive to Westchester gave him time to think. He'd met Elena at a charity gala 4 years ago. She'd been volunteering. radiant in her genuine desire to help others. They'd talked for hours about everything and nothing. She'd made him laugh, something he'd forgotten how to do in the relentless world of high finance. Their courtship had been a whirlwind. Weekend trips to the Hamptons, Broadway shows, quiet dinners at hole-in-the-wall restaurants she'd discovered. Elena had softened his edges, made him remember there was life beyond balance sheets and profit margins. The wedding had been everything she'd dreamed of. 300 guests at the plaza, flowers flown in from Ecuador, a 12-piece orchestra. Marcus had spared no expense because Elena's happiness had been his priority. Looking back, he wondered if that had been his mistake. Giving her everything before she'd learned to value anything. His phone buzzed. A text from his lawyer. Papers filed. We're ready to proceed. Marcus smiled, a real smile this time, and drove toward his house in Westchester. His house. Tomorrow, he'd have to deal with the legal proceedings, the asset division, the public spectacle of a high-profile divorce. But tonight, for the first time in months, he was going home to a house that belonged entirely to him. The jazz music on his car stereo seemed to match his mood perfectly. He'd always been good at reading the market, at predicting when to buy and when to sell. Turns out, he was pretty good at timing personal transactions, too. Elena had wanted to give him a birthday surprise. Well, she'd succeeded. But sometimes, the best surprise is the one you give yourself. When he pulled into his driveway, Marcus sat in the car for a moment, looking at the house he'd bought for them. The colonial-style mansion had been Elena's dream home. 5 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, a pool house where she'd planned to host dinner parties. They'd spent months renovating it, turning it into their sanctuary. Now, it felt like a mausoleum of their marriage. But it was his mausoleum, and he'd figure out what to do with it. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. Elena's presence had been erased, her clothes, her books, her collection of succulents she'd never quite learned to keep alive. Even her coffee mug was gone from the kitchen counter. Marcus poured himself a scotch, Macallan 25, a bottle he'd been saving for a special occasion. This seemed as special as any. He walked out to the pool house, where fairy lights Elena had strung up still twinkled in the darkness. The loneliness hit him then, sharp and unexpected. Not loneliness for Elena. That relationship had been dying a slow death for months. But loneliness for connection. For someone who knew him beyond his net worth and his professional reputation. His phone rang. Catherine Torres, the private investigator. Marcus? I wanted to check in. How did it go? Better than expected, Marcus said. She took the bait completely. Good. I have the final report ready if you need it for your attorney. And Marcus? I know this is hard, but you did the right thing. She was bleeding you dry, financially and emotionally. After hanging up, Marcus realized Catherine was right. Elena hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd been systematically taking advantage of him. The expensive yoga sessions, the shopping sprees, the unexplained cash withdrawals. She'd been preparing for this separation for months, siphoning money into accounts he didn't know about. But Marcus had been preparing too. Every mysterious charge, every suspicious transaction, every lie she'd told, he'd documented it all. While she'd been planning her exit strategy, he'd been building his defense. 6 months later, Marcus read in the society pages that Elena was working as a receptionist at a small law firm in Brooklyn. David Sullivan had moved to California after his business folded, and the IRS had finished with him. The article mentioned that she was living with her mother and taking night classes to finish her degree. Marcus folded the newspaper and looked out the window of his corner office at the Manhattan skyline. He had a client meeting in an hour, then dinner with Sarah, the art curator he'd been seeing. Sarah, who paid her own way, who had her own career, who laughed at his jokes because she found them genuinely funny. Sarah was different from Elena in every way that mattered. She was independent, intellectually curious, and most importantly, she was honest. Their relationship had started slowly. Coffee meetings that turned into lunch dates, art gallery openings that led to long walks through Central Park. His assistant buzzed in. "Mr. Martinez, your 3 o'clock is here." "Send them in," Marcus said, closing the newspaper. He had work to do. The client was a tech entrepreneur looking to diversify his portfolio. Young, ambitious, recently engaged. Marcus found himself offering advice that went beyond financial planning. "Protect yourself," he said as they wrapped up the meeting. "I don't mean to be cynical, but have your attorney draw up a solid prenup. Love is beautiful, but it's also fragile. Don't let anyone have the power to destroy everything you've built." That evening, Marcus picked up Sarah at her apartment in the village. She was wearing a simple black dress and silver jewelry she'd made herself. Another difference from Elena, who'd preferred designer everything. "Good day?" she asked as they walked to the restaurant. "Productive," Marcus said. "I helped a young entrepreneur protect his future, and I realized something." "What's that?" "I'm not angry anymore. For months, I was furious at Elena for what she did. But today, I realized I'm grateful." Sarah stopped walking and looked at him. "Grateful?" "She showed me who she really was, and she freed me to find someone who actually values what I have to offer." Sarah smiled and took his hand. "And what do you have to offer?" "Loyalty, honesty, really good scotch." Sarah laughed. "Well, I'm sold on the scotch." As they walked into the restaurant, Marcus realized that Elena had given him the best birthday gift of all. The chance to start over with someone who deserved his love. Because the best revenge isn't always about what you take from someone. Sometimes it's about what you build for yourself after they're gone. And Marcus Martinez was very, very good at building.